A Christmas Carol is brimming with descriptions of food. It's important for us to remember as readers that in a world where many working people suffered from malnutrition or illnesses stemming from the absence of vitamins and other dietary staples, food was a more important part of its celebration than it is today. The novella's virtuous characters are figures like Bob Cratchit and Old Fezziwig remember his boss, who shares food with others and enjoys it, even though it may be scarce and they're not particularly rich. Scrooge, on the other hand, does not consume food for pleasure. His dinner is melancholy and eaten in a tavern rather than prepared at home. The other characters in the novel equate food with hospitality and companionship, so it's a form of celebration. And while the working poor may not have very much food, the narrator shows them making the most of it. Many of the descriptions of food cut across class, showing that from the highest to the lowest class, all of them are making an effort to prepare and serve the very best food that they can afford. Shops are also an important part of the Christmas scene, and those who are unable to purchase are shown with their mouths watering as they pass by. These scenes, in which the poor admiringly gaze at what they cannot afford without coveting it, are in direct contrast to the revolting, decayed shops Scrooge sees when he and the ghost of Christmas yet to come journey to a slum area to observe the dealer in a second-hand goods shop. Nothing on display is tempting or desirable, and the shop represents the utter desperation that drives its clients to buy and sell its revolting contents. It's important to realise that A Christmas Carol is an allegory. This is kind of like a metaphor. A lot of stories are written just for the sake of a story. When we read A Christmas Carol, we realise that there's actual messages within the text. Taking us back to the lifestyle of the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution, we realise what some of Scrooge's messages are. Some of these are connecting with your fellow man, caring for your fellow man, the importance of celebration, and redemption even for selfish people. Charles Dickens did have an agenda as far as the government was concerned and as far as upper class people in looking after those who were less wealthy or who were put into poor houses. Fellowship is a strong theme within the novel, and we see this right from the beginning when it starts with Christmas. Christmas embodies fellowship, a time of giving, a spirit of comradeship. The charity collectors and Fred, Scrooge's nephew, particularly embody these qualities, and we see that the more that Scrooge is confronted with these types of characters, the more he shrinks further away as the sense of fellowship around him grows. The importance of family is clear in the novella, and we start to realise why Scrooge doesn't hold any value to it when we go back to the Ghost of Christmas Past and we see how he was treated by his father, and how his deceased sister Fran loved him and accepted him for everything that he was, but then he leaves her life tragically. The Cratchits embody everything that family is, regardless of wealth and status in society. We also see Scrooge lose his opportunity of a family with Belle because he is too focused on providing for her. While he clearly loved her, he lost sight of that because he wanted to make sure that he wasn't left in a state of poverty or being alone. Ironically, this did make him lose Belle in the end. Redemption is the main theme of A Christmas Carol. Some would say that A Christmas Carol is a Christian allegory of redemption. For example, particularly the characters or the allegorical figures of wanton ignorance. Rather than being traditional characters, they're there to represent something. In this case, the worst results of human negligence. Having gradually separated himself from his nephew and his friends, Scrooge has forgotten about the ties of humanity that join people together. Dickens emphasises Scrooge's isolation by positioning him as an observer of his own life. As a character, Scrooge has to be reintegrated into the community, and his emotional responses to his memories and his visions aid him in this process. Here we question the structure of the novel. Would Scrooge indeed be seeking redemption if he hadn't have gone all the way back to the Ghost of Christmas Past, the present, in which he sees and compares himself to the Cratchit family, the children of wanton ignorance, and the plight of Tiny Tim? Some may question whether Scrooge's redemption is sincere or whether it was simply born out of fear. This also begs the question, is it possible to maintain redemption if it's not sincere? The theme of death opens the novel in a remarkable way. The fact that Jacob Marley is dead is given prime importance by its forming the opening sentence well before Scrooge is introduced. With the ghost of Christmas yet to come, Scrooge visits the deathbed of an old abandoned man who he fails to recognise as himself. This scene has elements of real horror, as not only is this man's corpse completely alone and forgotten in death, but cats scratch at the door and rats gnaw beneath the hearth. In stark contrast to what we see as Scrooge's death, Dickens introduced a poignant but also rather tender scene where we see the death of Tiny Tim's deathbed. The family's general reaction to the young boy's death are well observed, such as their grief or the tender visit of the father to his son's deathbed. The death of an innocent child in a Christian family provides Scrooge with his needed lesson in tenderness. The finality of death is again raised as Scrooge is shown his own weed-infested grave. It's the ultimate realization for Scrooge, and his last lesson is learnt. From that sight, he pleads with the ghost to intercede for him and change his future, swearing not to be the same miserable man he has been. But the ghost is dumb, not able to speak, so Scrooge needs to work out his own salvation. He achieves this by determining to change his own future through caring for others, in particular Tiny Tim. It's clear in the novella the thread of Christianity weaves throughout the novel in addition to the redemption theme. From the start, Scrooge's nephew Fred refuses to let Scrooge's atheism and negativity dampen his Christian enthusiasm, calling out, "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" He's even charitable towards Scrooge in his absence later in the narrative when Scrooge is invisible with the ghost of Christmas present and he visits his living room. Early in the novel, Marley's ghost expresses the Christian sentiment of service to others in admonishing Scrooge before identifying the Christmas story in that blessed star which leads the wise men to a poor abode. But the main evidence of Christian living comes in the form of Tiny Tim and his family. Tiny Tim makes an example of himself in church on Christmas Day because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant to the congregation to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see, an obvious reference to Jesus Christ. Tiny Tim also calls God's blessing on everyone, which Dickens echoes in the last line of the novel. When Tiny Tim has died in the future, Scrooge remembers a line of scripture, "And he took a child and set it in the midst of them." To close the Tiny Tim episode, Dickens writes, "Tiny Tim, thy childish essence was from God." Although A Christmas Carol is primarily perceived as a ghost story, it's also a damning indictment of the inertia of the British government and the public in the 1840s and their failure to respond to widespread poverty and suffering. The character, Ebenezer Scrooge, is, of course, an extreme example of the self-interest that Dickens sought to attack. The majority of readers would certainly not have identified themselves with the miserable miser. In particular, he hoped to expose the self-interest underlying the government's failure to bring about widespread social reform and address the devastating effects of poverty in Britain's growing industrial cities.